Hey everyone, this is David Easterbrook. Today we're in the Pacific Northwest. We just flew in from Montreal last night, and today we're visiting Bonsai Mirai, which is the bonsai nursery belonging to Ryan Neal.
Different, but well, yeah, and it's interesting because with this nutrition, you can see, you can kind of see this was the state of the growth that we were kind of combating, and then this is what we've gotten through correcting the nutrition. But anywhere where the vascular distribution is restricted, you see the tree start to function at a different rate. Like things happen at a different pace. So on a tree where you wouldn't see that damage through the use of the nutrition and the different growth rates, we're actually learning about trees that have some vascular limitations that we otherwise would not be able to identify and see. So that's really fascinating.
Yeah, right there.
So, so for instance, when you say by nutrition, how many different are you affecting the nutritional uptake by pH only, or are you saying I'm using different formulas?
Yeah, our delivery mechanism is different. We don't use, let me see, it's not an absolute. We have shifted away from using commercial fertilizers and moved into independent singular forms of nutrition.
Oh, okay,
So we don't treat with an NPK. We treat with an N, we treat with a P, we treat with a K, and we treat with the iron, and we treat with the molybdenum, and we treat with the zinc, and we treat with a boron, and it's very it's very laborious.
Yeah. Mixture of foliar and systemic?
We've tried that. We don't find the foliar to be as functional on all of the trees. Certainly some are more responsive than others, but the way to really balance nutrition would be sort of a foliar root combination. Yeah, but you always lead with the root and then follow with the foliar. You never want to lead with the foliar. That could be catastrophic.
So the story I'm reading here is original branch structure, top gets blown out, and then it starts to bolt. And individual branches decide they're going to be the leader.
Yeah, loss of navigation in terms of hormonal dominance creates a multiple reiteration form of the tree, right, which is a standard conduct for a redwood. Given enough time, every redwood would look like this.
Well, you see that often along the coast in
of course,
Sitka spruces, for instance.
Yeah, or the cedars. Yeah, it's very consistent across oxen-driven growth in conifers. Pines don't do it so much. Pines aren't as, it's not as prevalent. It's more in the big tree form. So your skyscraping, Doug firs, hemlocks, redwoods, spruces, like these real massive apically dominant pieces. And then the Sierra junipers just went whoa, and it took a catastrophic decline. So we lost a lot of progress on them. And then we just found out that Sierra junipers will not tolerate potassium. They simply will not tolerate potassium. And this has been like Sierra junipers, their continued existence as bonsai subjects, they're really only successful in a few parts of the country. And it typically tends to center around very basic conditions with high alkalinity. So the potassium as an acidic component.
California guys get to grow gangbusters.
Oh, they love them. Yeah. Put all the bad water on them, and salt, and hard water and alkaline water, and they're just like, let's have more. Like the only balancing component is the organic fertilizer that some people apply, which is the only acidifying agent that they have. So, but this was a little bit of a triage place, but we finally broke through. and got it. Yeah, it's really exciting because I didn't know anybody that could keep a Sierra really. And here's the other thing is they got longer and longer and longer, and they wouldn't back bud. So it kept getting leggier and leggier.
I've got a Rocky Mountain that does that. I can't, and it just dies back, and a fine branch dies, and another fine branch dies.
So these are the things that we were seeing that we've been able to rectify. So we take these panels on and off every spring and fall.
Okay.
Yeah, the structure stays. So
Okay,
it holds a shade cloth, in the summertime. We didn't use, honestly, for the heat that we had this year, we didn't use shade cloth, which was really interesting because the nutrition gave the trees a lot more tolerance, especially silica as a fortifying part of the nutrition really helped with heat tolerance, which it would have been nice to know that last year, but we just didn't have that information. But yeah, this will get pruned and wired probably end of next month.
Silica is not easy to put in a form to get uptake.
No, you would have to have a delivery system for it. Yeah, you'd have to have a formulation that makes it plant available. But there are companies that have done that science. You can fix that. You can really fix that. You can develop a plan to fix that. That is within striking distance of the hobbyist, and that's why it was important for somebody somewhere to go through the pain of the process, right?
That being you.
That has historically been Bonsai Mirai, yeah, because you can't talk to anybody that can bridge the gap of why does this work in Japan and this doesn't work here, and there's an abundant amount of that information that just doesn't cross apply, and nobody knows why. I want to know why. I really want to know why.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
I think for a hobbyist to have success, that's probably a good ethos. Yeah, and I think one of the reasons that we're here in the Pacific Northwest, because it's the nursery capital of the world, in terms of being able to grow specifically conifers, but every species, for anybody who's farming or doing something of an agronomical sort of practice, you got to work out those quirks. You really have to work out the quirks. And mountain hemlock is pretty mindless here. You don't have to do much. It just does what it's going to do because it's native and it's local. Yeah.
And it does very poorly in Quebec.
Sure.
But, the thing with a lot of the mountain hemlocks is almost, they're so perfect when you find them that it's like you look at it and say,
Yeah, well, that's a different.
What am I
That's a
gonna
whole
do with
different.
it?
That's all we've been talking about this whole time is the science part of it, but that then becomes the aesthetic part. We spend a lot of time chasing ancient trees. As a company, we're in the wild as much as we possibly can be, documenting these things. Number one, because they're dying. It's widely known the ancient trees are going to probably be the trees that succumb to climate change because they can't adapt rapidly enough. But their offspring can. So we're going to have their genetics and we're going to have younger iterations, but you're not going to have the truly ancient aesthetic that continues to persist.
I'm looking at the juniper over here with the...
Yeah, and a lot of these, think about this. So exactly 18 months, not exactly, but we're in the 20, almost exactly 18 months ago, we hit 117 degrees in the garden, almost to the day, actually. June, what was that? June, no, excuse me, it was actually in the early portion of June. So a lot of the lack of sort of form in the trees is just letting them recover from that, right? And then we had some nutrition that we fixed, but we're moving into...
because part of that, sorry to interrupt, part of where I was going was you can go from very highly refined, Alakamura, your teacher, to a looser, when you speak of the ancient trees, which should have a much looser sort of foliage mass or form and so on. And are you finding that when all is said and done, you prefer more highly refined, or are you preferring to at some point you want to, as the artist, say, yeah, this is my art, and this is how you see my hand.
Sure.
Is the refinement of the foliage masses.
Yeah.
And which is, I think is very, very legitimate.
I don't know that I feel that way.
Some people say, I know David feels this way, saying, well, that's not what Mother Nature would produce, so therefore, you know, I'm not. And so where is there a boundary there that you're finding, or is that a moving boundary? Is that a moving line?
Oh, I think I'm understanding it more, but I think if we want what Mother Nature is going to produce, we shouldn't be doing bonsai. So I think there's like the extreme of that, right?
Yep.
Because let's just be really honest. Bonsai doesn't exist without the human.
Right.
Right?
It's an art form.
It's an interpretation.
Human
It's an abstraction.
Yeah.
Because even if you say it's a representation of nature in miniature, to take that tree, when you reduce that down to a much smaller scale, you can't cram all that into this, and you can't justify aesthetically in this space what that's doing. So
I say that all the time about it's an abstraction.
It's an abstraction.
Every bonsai is an abstraction.
And the human being is the filtration mechanism, you know. So when you to get to your point, I would like to be able to do it all very well, and I think having the capacity to do traditional, to do, you know, a natural, to do a Western, to do an Eastern, however you want to break it down. I personally want to be able to do it all well, because that means that my toolkit to address the piece of material gives me the ability to meet it where it's at and maximize its potential. But if you're asking me how I feel about defined versus a more loose organic form, I enjoy the process. But the ultimate goal is to disappear from the work, in my mind, where the person's artificial touch is gone. And in order to do that with our native species in North America, it takes something different than to do that with the native species of Japan that created the concept that that's the ambition. So a running juniper like a Rocky Mountain, to get it to naturally compress without a tremendous amount of wire and pruning and handling, demanded something different than the Japanese approach demanded. And you know, this tree,
Well, with their junipers that are naturally compact.
they're naturally mounding. Yeah, so they have a different habit, which is different hormonal structure to the plant. So that means in order to get to a point where you have a tree that is showing the acclimation to, or the conformity to that reduced environment, we can't try to get there by pushing that tree down a road that it can't roll along, you know. And that's where the nutrition or the biology and all of these things became as much an artistic exploration as it did a scientific. Health is a very subjective term, you know. You could say we're trying to cultivate bonsai in a lack of health, a la Dan Robinson, or you could say we're trying to reach such a supreme degree of health that we are able to determine the growth habit of the tree. And I do believe that that is possible. I do believe that's possible.
And you can't make a ponderosa pine look like a black pine.
Not
reasonably.
Not reasonably, not consistently.
And not aesthetically, I wouldn't ever want it to look
Sure,
like that.
sure. Yeah, that becomes like a value system at that point, you know. But come take a look at this one. Mountains, and this is from the Cascades.
Oh.
And no matter how hard we try, there's always going to be a discrepancy of scale and proportion in the foliage, but they're both Lasiocarpa, right? And it has no reflection on how they were planted, even though I'm sure that this is going to be more anemic. It still will not get down to that scale and proportion of the foliar mass, you know? But I can tell you that if I wanted to, if we worked at it hard enough, which I'm not saying that I want to work at it hard enough, but if I wanted to work at it hard enough, I could reduce that foliar mass to that via nutritional methodologies. And then the nutrition becomes an aesthetic application and becomes an aesthetic practice. So like, that's a really good just illustration of like bridging a gap of physiological differences that are regionally specific by a scientific application or practice that then becomes an aesthetic execution. Like it's really starts to become very muddy, you know, but it's also, you say bonsai is the meshing of art and science, and it's like, well, yeah, no, when science starts to become the art, that's pretty badass.
So, when you display that,
Oh, that's just in the event that we have snow. It's self-supported. Yeah.
my God,
Yeah.
that's fantastic.
Yeah, so it's supposed to be, you know, when you stand up at the top of Hurricane Ridge or the Olympics, and the clouds cover the ridges, it looks like you just have these shelves of rock, but really it's just a big Super Mario dome, you know.
You're saying this branch here is tied, that's the root ball
It's
underneath?
a tree, it's a separate tree.
Yeah, it's a separate tree.
And
Yeah. So this is a separate tree that we stuck there, and this is a tree that we put there, and they both grow in there.
and what's, so is the tree holding itself there, or is it somehow mechanically attached at the bottom here?
You mean, is this tied to the stone? Is that what you're asking me?
No, I mean this.
How is the root ball, I think he's saying, attached to the,
Oh, how is this
the
attached?
underneath of the rock?
Yeah, so I'm gonna tell you my sleight of hand trick here.
Right.
We cored this piece in several locations with a big hole saw.
Okay.
And then we took the roots up through the holes and laid them over at the back so that they grow
okay.
above this surface.
Right.
Because you can't water this enough underneath a
Right,
shelf that
right,
sheds water. And then we use that same core to create a bridge that we then tied the root system to hold this from moving. Yeah.
Very ingenious.
That's how we did that one.
It's brilliant and beautiful.
It's an interesting piece, and Jason Eider collected the material, and that's really the catalyst for anything.
Who
How-
collected it?
Jason Eider up in Seattle.
There can be genetic, differences also. In certain areas, like in northern Vermont, they collect balsam firs with very small needles.
Sure.
And just from one area.
Yeah.
And so,
Oh no, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, I'm assuming this is a phenotypical difference. There's a genetic difference because they regionally are different. You know, it's like the Rocky Mountain junipers are the continual reference for that.
so I don't think they'll ever get, them quite identical.
No, it won't be
That's fine.
identical. But I actually think it creates a
Yeah.
good play because if this is foreground and it's a larger scale and that's background and it's a smaller scale, you actually are playing on the notion of depth, both in terms of scale as well as physical position, which I think is really rock and roll. As if you want to talk about being fun, if you're just playing with people's minds,
I take a picture
contextually.
of this because it's just, this is astounding piece.
Yeah, I think this one's really interesting. There's probably like 3 or 4 junipers in the garden that are of like a superior age, and this
Where was this collected?
is the Rocky Mountains.
Randy?
Yeah, that's Randy. Yeah, any really significant. There's a few other collectors that have collected, but Randy's sort of in a class of his own. But this is absolutely a
Sculpture quality.
high hundreds. Yeah,
It's amazing.
high hundreds to it potentially touching on the millennium mark. I don't know if it does or not. It'd be impossible to know actually, but
Wow.
yeah. Wow.
I love the way you've used the rock on its side.
And you're finding amazing
Did you
rocks.
carve it out, or
No,
was it?
no. We go to great lengths to find stone. I look for stone all over the country.
This looks like California stone.
This is actually St. George, Utah.
Oh.
Yeah,
It's
St.
really-
George, Utah. Yeah, and it's when
Really
you,
interesting.
all of the compositions have to stand on their own. Otherwise, it's just to have to prop something is kind of ridiculous. But yeah, it's and
Amazing composition, the two of them together.
This is an exaggerated abstraction of a wind-influenced tree. It's not accurate in any way. This is a very style. This is heavy style, heavy style. I want to be able to heavily style something to have it be defined in a way that still represents and sort of speaks to the tradition of bonsai. But then I would also like to have a windswept tree that looks like I haven't ever touched it. And I think both of them are equally as valuable. But maybe it's the context of both of them being in a singular space that makes it a discussion,
So you're saying this tree was, when it was growing,
Was upright?
It was upright. Well, on the rock, it was probably laying in a very similar position with the live vein shaded, probably on the north or east side. This is not absolutely upward facing and south facing. Now, when I saw it, it was sitting up in a nursery can. I don't know how it was oriented in the mountains, but we laid it down because it's by far, especially this branch having so much live dead interaction, to try and artificially bend those into positions that conform to the traditional model would really be to deface a piece of material that gives you an opportunity to push into an unknown aesthetic in bonsai. Which again, if you're living in Japan, developing your data bank of natural imagery from the island of Japan, they don't have an old tree that's cultivated landmass for thousands of years. So North America having 5,000-year-old bristlecone pines, we do have to understand that we have a unique opportunity to create aesthetics that nobody else has explored yet. It's just a matter of whether or not we want to have the technical capacity to, and also whether you've exhausted the desire to repeat the traditional model enough that you want to push outside of that because you're fucking bored, you know?
That's a good one.
So let's just like call it what it is. You know, I sat on my knees in Seiza for 6 years, rinsing and repeating the traditional model. I knew before I went there was an opportunity outside of that. I had to exhaust the desire to create, because it is, you know, if you look at the traditional model and the proportions that have, you know, a really strong connection to the golden rule, there's a physiological response when you create a beautifully traditional tree. It's calming, it's satisfying. There's a sense that's a hormonal release, that's a chemical release, it's a reaction in your brain that's happening to that visual proportion that you've created. Okay, you do that enough, it stops giving you the same addictive response, and all of a sudden it's like, well, I want to see something that really challenges and pushes my boundaries, and that's really what I started trying to make here.
That traditional experience is demonstrated right here.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. This is a beautiful bridge between the radically outlined and the very controlled tradition. This has radical with that craft, the hand in the craft of tradition involved. And I think there are pieces that have zero tradition, and I think there are pieces that are almost entirely traditional here. And I think that's what I was saying to David. I think you need to be able to do it all well in order to have the toolkit to meet the material that you're experiencing where it's at. Because if I take a field-grown Telperian pine that's been grown to be an informal upright Japanese black pine, I better be able to I'm not going to turn that into a reflection of a bristlecone. It's not the DNA of the intention, the species nuances, as well as the technical execution. None of the DNA is there for it to be a representation of a 5,000-year-old tree. So as a practitioner, I've got to be able to interpret that and act on the material in an appropriate fashion.
You use practitioner instead of artist. Is there a reason?
What's that?
You use practitioner instead of artist.
I don't think that the creation of the tree is the art. I don't. I think that it's the context in which you present it that becomes the art. I'm more and more resolved in that perspective.
Well, which would take you into the same sphere as Suzuki.
Sure.
Yeah. And when I was over at Mr. Sudo's place, he made an interesting thing about a display, where he said, display is not about the bonsai. Of course, this is his particular take.
Yeah.
He said display is not about the bonsai. He said bonsai is one element of the display.
Sure.
Yeah,
Sure.
which is kind of what you just
Yeah,
said.
sure.
What I heard you say here is, it's when it's finally displayed.
Well, and the projects in the wild have helped me with this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's your most radical, in your opinion, the most radical tree? That's the other side of that gap.
Go up to the deciduous garden. Good question. we're working on chasing aesthetics. This is certainly one of the oldest trees in the garden by a very significant degree. Another Randy tree. Yeah, once in a lifetime tree. And we're halfway through the process. This got sidelined because the wood on this is so incredible, but it's very delicate. It's incredibly delicate in these wet conditions. So in order to get the wood, it's a very time-intensive process to wash it without destroying it. You can't just take a brush and scrub this thing, or it would. So anyways, we're waiting to finish the wood, but
So I missed the first part. Are you putting hardener in it then?
No, we don't need to, as long as we can protect it, which is part of what we're building, right? But he was asking me what I think the far degree of radical is. I think this is a far degree of radical as far as age, but as far as conceptual radical, I think the far degree of conceptual reality is really eliminating the ceramic vessel and starting to, there's a quartz steel structure down there. There's the forest on the dead wood. There's using, a natural element as a representation of wood. I think those, for me, become the most
Not appearing to be a container.
Out of words? You haven't said a thing so far in this vlog.
I love the idea of planting it in that dead wood. It really does give it a wonderful windswept feeling. Something like a tree you would see on the Crummoaks, high up at the on a mountain at the tree line.
When you start challenging the bone portion of it, and the tree sai is culturally removed from a repetition of aesthetic, now you're not doing the same thing anymore. And that's really, is that more pure to North America or blah blah? I don't know. That's not for me to decide. I just know that I feel is these types of compositions motivate me more.
Yeah.
But you have to continue to keep your blade sharp on the traditional model. You have to stay rooted and grounded in a practice in order to be able to explore. You can't just shed all convention and run naked through the streets. Like, that's not the way that an organized application of thought works. You've got to stay at some, otherwise you lose your ground entirely and you just become crazy.
Ballet dancers, despite how contemporary the dance is, start every rehearsal at the bar with the 14 positions.
Of course, yeah. I mean, it's like, it's sun salutation in yoga. It's like, no matter how radical you can contort your body, this downward dog is still going to be, one of the most fundamental poses. It's like, it's consistent across all really great practices. And if somebody views bonsai as a art form and they're an artist that does bonsai, then that might be different, but can they handle every vernacular of the art form as they're confronted with it? No, and they're not trying to, and you got to understand that. But as a devoted practitioner to the practice of bonsai, that to me seems like that's the ambition and goal.
Ryan was really generous, giving us so much of his time this morning, but now he's really busy doing a construction job on his property. So let's walk around and see some of his trees. Look at this gorgeous cascading ponderosa pine. The movement and the dead wood in this tree is absolutely fascinating to see. It's like the scales on a snake rising up, some viper here. Or look at this two-trunk ponderosa pine. Look at the way it's planted on this amazing stone. Where he found it is impossible to know, but just the combination of tree and stone is absolutely so artistic, is superb. Very interesting concept. Planting this Rocky Mountain juniper on this vertical stone. It's absolutely amazing how the roots have been trained down the stone, all the way down here to the base of the stone. And the deadwood, giving it that wild feeling. The deadwood, the way it's been placed at the base, is so artistic. Get a load of the size of this pot. The pot is well over a meter long. It's a huge pot. It's an ancient tree in that slanting, slightly windswept feeling to it, with all that beautiful dead wood at the base. Again, a beautiful, beautiful composition. This is an amazing composition. This this spruce is planted in a metal sculpture. I don't know how the tree stays alive, because this metal must heat up in the summer, but here we are in the Pacific Northwest, so maybe it doesn't get that warm. But the combination of the metal structure and the tree that, again, slightly windswept, is really, really quite fabulous. The way the tree sweeps over this pseudo mountain going upwards and the mountain going downwards is really, really, again, so artistic. It's just mind-shattering. Look at how beautiful Ryan Neal's, this tree has this wonderful circular movement that's coming around and going up. And Ryan found this wonderful shell pot. I think it's from Czechoslovakia, and the way it wraps around the tree and just keeps that movement going on and on and on is outstanding. Again, what is so interesting about these trees, this is an amazing spruce, and again, the combination of tree and pot, I really find it very unusual. I'm not sure whether I like that texture. It almost looks like the texture of the wall, the outside wall of an industrial building, but it goes so well with the texture of the bark. So that's what you're looking for in bonsai, this weird combination of tree and pot and the way they're harmonized together. Great, great, great harmonization. Here you can see some of the size of the deadwood that Brian is using in his compositions. These will all probably go into a bonsai composition. This deadwood and this deadwood and this deadwood probably comes from Montana or Colorado. Excuse me?
We should get going pretty soon.
Okay.
Yeah, we're gonna run out of daylight otherwise.
All right. Okay. This is a beautiful ponderosa pine. It's Myogi or informal upright style, but look at the pot it's planted in, a Ron Lang pot. Now Ron is retired now, but he created these beautiful pots during the time he was making pots, and the combination of tree and pot together is outstanding. Sort of that wild quality in trees, and using stones and metal sculptures and everything else to bring out that quality.
Try and tap into it. Yeah.
I don't think, as you said today, it's accessible to most amateurs. Your trees are basically too large for most collections, too large to overwinter on the East Coast, that's for sure. But to just see it as a museum of incredible bonsai, it's certainly worth it.
Well, that means a lot. That means a lot coming from you. You're one of the pioneers, my
Oh
friend.
God! And the invitation is always open. If you want to come back to Montreal, Montreal would like to have you.
That's great.
Express the interest. I know how busy you are these days.
Yeah.
But if you could spare some time to come for, in your free time, just not winter.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. I would love that.
You would?
I would love that. Yeah,
Okay, good.
I would absolutely
Okay.
take you up on that.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I'd
So let's be
appreciate
in,
that,
we'll be
yeah.
in touch about that.
Okay, good, good, very good.
Enjoy your time out here.
Yeah.
So everyone, I wish I could have shown you all of these amazing masterpiece bonsai today. Unfortunately, we have to leave now, but who knows, maybe we'll be able to come back here another time and we can show you even more of Ryan Neal's fabulous bonsai nursery.